Welcome to Jumpstart 2014. Let's play. So I thought maybe let's quickly talk about why Jumpstart 2014 is called Let's Play. When we were sitting together, the wonderful team at the German Book Office, and Samina and Anita and I, we sort of came to realize that that playing, or the idea of play, is perhaps the most basic way in which children engage with the world or interact with the world around them. And the more we thought about it, the more we realized that that's perhaps the most basic way in which we as adults also engage with the world. And especially as creators of content for children, no matter what kind of content it is, this is also what we're doing. We're toying with ideas, we're playing with ideas, and we're always sort of trying to find a way to make the world more interesting for children. And then we thought, well, that's probably what we should call Jumpstart this year. So let's play. And so this particular panel, what we're going to talk about a little bit is the idea of how storytelling and playing engage with each other, how games inform the act of storytelling. And we have three wonderful panelists here. Asha there is a familiar face to all of you here in Bangalore, I think. Asha has written 13 books, right? Yeah, 13 books. And I think she's written across genres for children, and she's worked with several publishers, and she's worked with in very, very playful ways in the kind of books that she's written. So I think what Asha is going to be able to provide us is an idea of how the creation process in the most traditional medium, which is books and writing for children, the idea of how games and playing inform even the most traditional aspect of this. Next we have Sophie Benini Pietromacchi, have I got it right? Who is a wonderful Italian illustrator who's based out of France.
French illustrator.
She's here with much help from the French embassy, and it's wonderful to have Sophie also here with us. Sophie's got two books out in the Indian market thanks to Tara Books, which is a publishing house based in Chennai. One is called The Book, and the other is called The Color Book, both of which are outside. And Sophie's talked to us a lot about how she ideates through a treasure trove of ideas. I think that's the sort of thing that she's been talking about. So that's going to be interesting as well. And Anshumani, who's sitting next to me, is also a familiar face here in Bangalore. He is a former writer, is what he calls himself. He's written several books and has moved on to the world of gaming, which is completely different but also very similar, I think, in what is what we've come to understand. Very different perspectives, and we're going to see how we can play around with them. So the idea for storytelling in a playful world, I think what I find interesting is that when we come together to create books for children or games for children, or when we illustrate for children, we're playing so much with ideas. And how does it happen for you guys that you start with something like a seed of an idea, I think, and then you engage with it and play with it and write it and rewrite it or re-illustrate it and edit it and work on it at so many different levels until the final product is a culmination of several different extremely organic and independent layers, but come together in such a way that the sum of all the parts is so much more than just the parts individually themselves. So maybe Asha, you could talk to us a little bit about how you engage with ideas to start with and how it comes and culminates in this book or 13 books that you've written.
So I think one of the things that I find that has really drawn me to writing for children is the fact that the entire thing is so playful. The creation is extremely a playful activity. So I'll just take you through some of the steps. It is a very personal and private activity, and there's no formula to it. But as Mansi mentioned, it usually starts with an idea which could happen anywhere. And I think most writers have various ways in which they document these ideas in notepads or little slips of paper. And from that point onwards, it's like a whole lot of playing before the slog. So the way I do it is the initial bit, once I get the idea, which could come from a fragment of conversation or an article in the newspaper, is that I totally go on to paper. I don't know whether this is a generational thing or whether it is because I think pen and paper kind of liberates you and it better mimics the way that your mind actually moves all over the place. So there's a lot of playing I do on paper. I doodle, I draw maps, and so finally there will be a series of pages which are full of scribbles, and it looks like a circuit diagram, an ECG, and a map. And very often, actually, children ask me how do you get ideas and how do you develop them. So I have an explanation which I'll share with you. So I tell them that when I start the writing, I put like a flip. It's almost like flipping on a switch in your mind, and I tell them that my mind goes into what I call the octopus Spider-Man mode. It is almost like your brain is just sending out webs in all different directions. So imagine that there was Spider-Man, and instead of just 2 arms, he had 8. So can you imagine how many directions he would be throwing those webs? So I tell them that that is like a good way to start the process. I say just be very free and playful and throw ideas all over the place. The wackier and more bizarre, the better. So that's pretty much what I do. And then at some point I start discarding the ideas which I don't want to use, and I zero in on a few. And since I'm writing books for children, I do feel a challenge to give them something very different. Like I want to be the writer who provides that little twist or something different. So there's a whole lot of that which goes on before I finally get onto the computer and start writing.
So I think what you're saying basically is that you start with a large block of ideas and you keep hacking away at them until you come to a central integral part of it, which is very similar to the editorial process as well, I think. So maybe Sophie, you want to weigh in on how you come up with ideas as well, because your books I've seen you write and illustrate them, and there's so many ideas in there that are very important through illustration but also through the written word.
Well, first of all, I have to thank l'Alliance Française for inviting me and the French embassy. And in my books, I have the privilege to talk about the creation, because my books are for make the children create their own books. So I think a lot about the process of creation, because it's the moment that it's very fragile. You don't have to force it, and you have only to make it go now. So with the children, what I'm doing, and it's very natural in me, it's that I became a child too, because I'm very connected with that part of me when I was 5 years old, and I can remember all my thoughts, not all, but I can remember how I used to feel. So my position on my books is to be near the kids and start to discover with them the things. So I don't give them rules, but I'm playing with them. So step by step, we discover, and one of the things that I used to discover is the treasure hunt. So it's very natural in them. So they start to get to go around, take material, and then they put all the material in front of them, and they start to create characters. I can show you an example. Okay, so for example, if they choose a feather, if they found a feather now, this feather can be a fish, it can be the wing of an angel, of a bird. It can be. They have to look at the structure of what they found, and they have to transform it. It's a little bit like the game of disguise. This is Robin Hood, and then it becomes another thing. So across the material, they are finding characters. They're step by step. They're coming alone, and it's very important for me. That the things are talking by themselves. Okay, that's the most important thing. That they found their rules, their discipline in that, and their order. So it's a playing it's really a playing that creates. No, that's my way.
It's interesting that you've talked about rules, because I think that segues beautifully into the kind of work you do, which is rule-driven, and the worlds that you've created have certain rules, and the way you engage with the game also depends very heavily on these rules. And how has your experience as a writer informed your experience as a gamer?
Okay, so I think these collar mics need to be discarded. Am I audible now? Yeah. So it's been an interesting journey for me. As a writer, I think I kind of fall somewhere in between what Asha was saying about the process and what Sophie was saying. So the part where I'm still coming up with ideas is actually very enjoyable for me. The actual writing process is very miserable for me. And I think the arrow of causality is reversed. I don't think I write well when I'm not miserable. So it's so the part where I'm actually sitting and coming up with ideas and jotting them down there's a lot of enjoyment in that. The only difference though is that I don't actually start executing a story or a novel or a game without having done a lot of research and without knowing all the rules of the world that I'm creating. Specifically when I'm writing either science fiction or fantasy, I think I need to understand the world in which I'm creating the story. So all the backstories, who created this world, what are the elements in this world, how do things interact, how do items interact with each other, and how do people interact with each other. If it's a magic-based world, then what are the rules of the magic? By the way, this has also held true even when I'm writing a story set in a regular world without any fantasy or science fiction elements to it. So it could mean I could end up writing an 8-page short story, but my notes would probably run into 40-45 pages because there'll be a lot of background material on it. So I need to know everything about what I'm writing, not necessarily what's going to happen in the story, don't get me wrong. That is, you discover a lot of it while you're writing it. So for me, the initial part is very research-based. It's almost an academic pursuit of the different angles that this world can take. Somehow that has actually helped transitioning from what is essentially a solo pursuit, right, as a writer, to designing games, which is essentially a group effort. So in a typical game development environment, you have game designers, you have user experience designers, you have developers, engineers, you have artists, you have animators, you have quality assurance people. So it's a fairly large team. A typical mobile game takes about 10, 12 people to make it. But the process of exploration and figuring out why you're making the kind of game that you're thinking of making is pretty similar. It's just that it's shared across 12 people. So that part of it is very enjoyable. And it is, of course, compressed. But there is a lot of research that goes into it. And of course, there the research is not just into the rules of the game that you're going to build, which is very critical, but a lot of other things. What are, because you eventually have to execute, you also have to start thinking about what are your restrictions in actual implementation. The great thing about writing is that when you're writing alone, you don't necessarily have that many restrictions. Whereas, say, if you're making a game, you might have a restriction that the game cannot exceed this particular size, right? Whereas in a book, well, unless your publishers have specifically said that, let it be a small book, don't make it like a huge 1,000-page tome, then it's a different thing. But that, whether it's 100 pages or 125 pages, nobody is going to worry about it that much. Whereas in a game, there are certain restrictions in terms of the quality of images and things like that. So the restrictions are a lot more. But the first part of that process, the discovering what we are about to make, is a very enjoyable process. Making a game is, somebody very famously said, and I think people from the outside probably think that gaming companies probably have a lot of fun making games, which is true to a certain extent, but it's not really true. It's almost like you might like, I think a German game designer once gave this example. You might like, eating sausages, right? But you would hate working in a sausage factory. So gaming is, and I think writing to a lot of extent is also pretty similar. Reading might be enjoyable, but the act of writing need not always be that enjoyable. It could be quite miserable at times.
So it almost seems like we have two very different worldviews here, despite three very different media. For example, in your case, I'm seeing that there is a trajectory from writing, and then you did a couple of game books, and now you're full-time into gaming, and that there's a clear trajectory there in that you've moved in a certain direction, and it's almost as though you're not looking back right now. Is that for the moment? But in Asha, your case, I think you're very married to the traditional medium of writing books for children, and obviously that's a space that you've conquered very well by writing across so many genres and so beautifully. And in the same way, in the world of illustration, although you dabble with mixed media and with so many different methods of illustration, it is almost a traditional way of creating for children. So it seems to me like your worldviews ought to be at loggerheads with each other, but then they're not. And maybe we could talk a little bit about traditional versus what we now refer to as new media and transmedia, and the kind of work that you do, and why they're not necessarily as different as people think they are. Anybody?
The way I'd look at it is there are two perspectives to it. There's the business side of things, which we could discuss perhaps later. I think all of us here, would like to bring out the creator's perspective. But of course, in the audience, I'm very sure that there are people who might be associated with it from the business side of things. From a creator's perspective, I think there's never been and I said this in the Delhi conference also, I think there's never been a better time to be a creator of any type, whether it's an illustrator or whether it's a writer, it's an artist, animator, even a developer, right? And especially if you're creating, you could be creating for anyone, but especially in the field of children, because there are so many different mediums and so many different formats through which you can appeal to children. I obviously clearly fall on the side where I think no medium is bad, and which is true, because books could also be bad, right? Great example is if you have children, obviously you don't want your child reading 20 hours a day, because after a while even that is going to hamper your child's progress, right? So it has to be everything in moderation. But from that perspective, for a creator, I don't think as a creator I have ever tried to block myself from trying out different mediums and trying out different formats. I've written for films, I've written for television, I've written for the stage, short stories, long stories, novels, novellas, writing for games and developing games, writing game books, structural linear narratives and non-linear narratives. So from that perspective, if you just want to write, I don't think you should be restricting yourself from the format in which you're writing. And there is a lot to learn. Writing for the stage, for example, can make you a much better dialogue writer, so that when you write a novel, your characters sound very authentic, right? So from a learning perspective as a creator, I don't think any creator should restrict themselves from creating across mediums. From the second perspective of it, as a creator, you want to create things and you want people to consume those things. From that perspective, new media offers you the kind of distribution channels that old media cannot even match. Let's take a typical example. Yeah. No, but let's take a typical example, and all Indian publishers would agree with me. For a published book to be successful in India, you would want its first print run to be sold out, which is typically of the order of 2,000 to 5,000 books. That's a very small number, by the way. If this print run is sold out within the first few months, the book is successful, right? Internationally, of course, this number could be as high as 20,000 books, 50,000 books, 100,000 books. The problem is that most of us only hear of the bestsellers, where we say, oh, over the first weekend they sold 100,000 copies, but that's a very rare occurrence, right? For most books, even published by large publishers like Penguin or Harper, the case would be a couple of thousand copies. Now, if you were a writer for a game, your game could very easily get consumed by millions of people. Typically, games have of the order of 20,000, 30,000 downloads a day. Now, the business model is obviously different. For a book, you're paying up front. For a lot of games, the games are free and revenue is made at a later stage. Or, of course, a game could be a console game where you're paying for a game up front. But the economics and the way digitally things are distributed is very different. There are, of course, other restrictions in the printed medium, and that's why ebooks are taking over, because the cost of producing an ebook is so lesser compared to the cost of producing a printed book. So I'm not just saying formats, I'm also saying formats and mediums allow you to distribute in such a large way and reach out to a huge audience. Let's throw a few numbers around. We have 850 million mobile subscribers in India, of which 150 million people have smartphones, which makes India the third largest smartphone market in the world. That number will grow to 220 million by the end of this year. Data usage in India, there are two types of data usage: broadband and mobile data usage. Mobile data usage has already crossed broadband data usage in India, which means that for a and out of those 220 million people, most people are in the age group of 16 to 25. Which means for most Indians over the next 3 or 4 years, the very first screen of any kind that they would interact with is going to be a mobile phone. It's not going to be a book, sadly. However much we want it to be a book, it's not going to be a book. It's not going to be a television, it's not going to be a laptop, it's not going to be an iPad. It's going to be a mobile screen. So from that perspective, we should be focused on that, both from the business side of things as well as from a creator side of things. If you want to write a story of any kind and you want the maximum number of people to read it, right? Forget making money on it and other things, but if you want the maximum number of people to read it, you should be writing in a format that is accessible to the most number of people. Books are not accessible to the most number of people. That's sadly the truth.
Okay, so I think there's just about one point on which I agree with Anshumani. That different media have different challenges, but there are certain points. And one of them is that if you create in one media, that you're completely limited by it. That even today, when I'm writing, there are so many unexplored avenues. So it is an option, I think, for a writer to explore those avenues. If you happen to be the kind of writer who wants to write a game, that's also legitimate, that's fine. But I think there is a lot of excitement in writing a story. And for me, I think one of the things which leaves me cold about, say, writing a game book, one could be maybe that I have not challenged myself, is that there is something more organic about the story in a book. It's not a random thing which happens. The choices which are given to characters are not just a random set of choices. Everything is kind of linked with the decisions the character makes, or it's more organic, and it's so. And for me, I think that is very important as a creator. Now, when I give it to children, I also, again, don't like to restrict them by saying, if I were to take my book into a school and I'm doing, a playful thing, capitalizing on the child's impulse to engage playfully with something, I kind of resist this thing of giving them 5 options. You can either do this, do this, do this, do that. for me, it's more exciting for the child to say, okay, now this is the scene. What would you like to do from here? How would you like to take off? So I think, and I kind of am really surprised how Anshumani says that the first thing a child should be exposed to is a mobile screen. I don't quite see that happening. I mean, though, yeah.
I'm not saying from a parent's perspective or from what we should be doing. You do not have a choice in that. The chances are, no, so the arrow of causality is going to be that children in the modern world will be surrounded by screens more often than they will be surrounded by books. I'm talking about a large statistical set. I'm not talking about individual parents and how they deal with their children. I'm saying statistically speaking, the largest number of children will first see any sort of media for the first time on a mobile screen in India as opposed to any other format. Individually, yes. I know parents who don't let their children watch television till the age of 12, and that's a personal choice. You can also restrict mobile usage. All those are personal choices. I'm talking about from a statistical perspective, from a large number perspective, right? Secondly, I wasn't just talking about game books. I'm sorry if you misunderstood that. I'm saying writing of any kind. If you're writing a short story, a conventional linear short story also, the choice as a writer that you have is whether to put it in the format of a book, a printed book, or as an e-book, or as a picture book, or something which is accessible on a digital medium. I'm not saying that everyone has to write game books. I don't think everyone should be writing game books. I'm saying even any kind of writing can be on any kind of medium. One should not restrict, do not confuse the act of writing with the medium, which is a book. I'm saying let's dissociate ourselves with the medium of publication and the act of writing.
Yeah, I also think there's one thing which a book does, which kind of gets lost in translation, is, there's this whole emotional and underpinning of, it's a very dynamic layer of decisions being made, emotions, and I think that's something that the book does wonderfully well. So I think that is one aspect which would get lost in the translation. So while it's fine to have all other medium for creators of books, I think the book still offers a lot of potential and a lot of challenge.
Well, I think that I'm happy even if only 3 people are doing a book with me. Even if only 3 people read my book, I'm happy, because I think it's a seed that can be communicated. So the thing about medium, well, I used to do cinema, to how do you say, scenographic? Now, when you decorate for cinema, comment on dit, décor, chef décor. Yes. So I had to make the wall my illustration for a scene, and it was very, very useful, because like that, for me, for my work, it was important, because I know that the day after all will be destroyed. So I put less importance to my work. So I work a lot after, because I think it's important. Every medium gives you his particularity. So I'm happy that we can do books in every medium. I'm okay for that. But it's important for me that children make their own books, because like that they touch it. Like that they start to fix stories, to need stories, to maybe it's a kind of discover that they can help them to read too. If they start to touch because they are only touching screen, you know. So if they are making, I think it's important, both things, you know. But I'm okay on doing in every medium. For me, it's I would like to find the way to make them do their own book in even in their phone, you know, to make an app with my books. I'm okay for that. If they make them doing their books, you know, that's my point of view. But I agree completely with Aisha, because for me there is a sensuality on reading, on reading with a child, on be with him, on turn the pages, on touching the illustrations. So for me, a book it's a word, and a screen it's not a word. It's I don't know how to tell. You should.
So I think coming to the point, I think you raised a very wonderful point, which is there should be something tactile to the experience. You should be able to touch. The great thing with everyone should go check out. There's this new device called the Osmo, which essentially is it's a bunch of sensors that you can put on a regular iPad for your kid. So while your kid is playing with actual puzzle pieces and putting them together, on the screen the kid can see what shape the puzzle is taking. So they have a bunch of different games. You can directly draw on a regular piece of paper, and that drawing gets translated to the screen, and then you can color it on the screen. So the idea is, for even a child could very easily create something and then very easily share it with his or her friends, instead of trying to get 20 prints out of it and then going individually to people and saying, hey, this is for me. I could just create a nice drawing, email it or send it to a group of my friends. You also said that, you know, you'd be glad that if only 3 people read, because, and you used a very wonderful word, seed. Right? I think this is where different. There's a science fiction author called Cory Doctorow, who gives an example that human beings, because we are mammals, we like the mammalian way of growing, which is that I will have 2 offsprings and they will have 4 offsprings and so on, right? This is our way of thinking about growth. And actually, surprisingly, the way we even think about businesses is that, because originally we started making by physical products, right? Are very fond of saying, my book is my baby, right? So even when a book is printed, every copy of your book, you have an attachment to it. A few days back, the warehouses of a publisher burnt down. A lot of us had our books in that. I had tears in my eyes because I knew a couple of, I mean, they lost tens of thousands of books, but I also knew that my books were in that warehouse, right? It really hurts you because each one of those books, even though you don't own it, it's out there for distribution. It really, really troubles you. Whereas the way plants grow, if you've seen dandelions and their seeds, they just float around, right? So plants just let their seeds wander off, and the seeds go into different places. Some of them find roots, some of them don't. But the point is, the way they propagate is very different from the way mammals propagate, right? The idea, both from a business perspective and as a creator perspective, we have to slowly move away from the mammalian way of thinking, that I will own every bit of it and I'll give it out and hand it out, to thinking like a plant, the way a dandelion grows, right? Which is, so for example, a lot of authors are resistant to putting up their work for free online, right? Whereas all research points to the fact that if your work is available for free online, your actual physical book sales will go up, because a lot more people will have access to your work. So if you're a poet, put up your poetry for free online, a lot more people will read it, they'll discover it, and they'll want to buy the book that you have, your publishers have printed for you. So that is a way, free distribution models, right? What I'm saying is we should be more open to like that. The artwork, the text, to actually find new places where otherwise nobody would have ever been able to reach it.
I think I completely agree with what all three of you have been saying, which is that the creative process is not necessarily the same as the dissemination process, and that there's something really wonderful about the way each of you creates. And I've seen all your books, and I've just had a look at some of the games that you were talking about yesterday as well, day before yesterday as well. So I think what happens is that the process of creation is this beautiful organic creature that comes together in your minds and by the way in which you engage with the world, and then at some point it translates itself into a medium or a format, and each of you has perhaps attached yourself to certain formats and have done that in very beautiful ways. But I don't think that changes the way in which the process begins, which is very similar for all three of you. So, I guess that's what we're trying to say even through Jumpstart, with the idea of let's play. No matter what way we're playing with the world, there is something very organic about the way content creators engage with content for children. Which brings me to my next question, and this I'm asking with some level of selfishness because it's something I've grappled with for years. When we're creating content for children, we obviously begin with the idea of, okay, so what do children want to read, or what do children want to do, and what is it that they want, what kind of ideas do they want to play with, so to speak. And I have spent so much time trying to just crack this problem and try and figure out what children like and what they don't like, and what kind of language appeals to them and what kind of formats appeal to them. And just around the time when I think I've cracked this extraordinary puzzle that exists, I realized that even no matter how we create these things that children want or things that we think children want, the people who are making decisions for the children are not the children. It is really the only genre in which you are not marketing to the target audience. You're marketing to the parents and teachers and librarians of the target audience. And so it's almost as though you have to create this thing that the child wants and then package it in such a way that the adult also wants it. And that can be very tricky. So I'd love you guys to kind of weigh about on how you work with these ideas. Do you think that there is some merit in the way that the adult perceives the child's world, and is that the kind of content we should create for the child, or do we directly create for the child, and how do we solve the problem of the child not having enough agency to pick up what we've created?
Yeah. Mansi, you've really touched on a very, what shall I say, a nerve, because this is really, I think, a problem which anyone who creates content for children faces. And I feel that you should only concentrate on the child and hope that the marketing will take care of the rest. And because, very often parents themselves don't have the best idea of what appeals to their child, or some of them don't remember how playful and they were. And I think especially nowadays parents do want a little bit of educational input, or they want some skill improvement, and they may have been the most playful kids in class, but suddenly when it's their child. But I would go with the thing that just give the child the best. And again, what is the best? We don't know, because what one child really likes is what another child loathes, and again, what one parent looks for is what someone else would not pick up. So I would go with the model that just what you think is really good, and hopefully you can bug your publishers. And I think also authors have to get involved in bringing parents around to a particular way of thinking. So when we go to schools, talk to the teachers about it, maybe write about ways to choose books for children. I think we have to, and I actually, as a children's author, I definitely see myself as a collaborator with the educator and the parent in introducing the child to this whole wonderful world of reading. So it has to go beyond the creation of a book. I think we have to meet parents, meet educators, and try to convince them to, think along the same lines. Yeah.
I think that that we have to think about the child, because for me, when I'm a parent, to have child, it was the chance to see things more clearly and to have a second childhood. So for me, books have to be for the child and have to be true and have to be go to the essential as the child do. That's it.
Sophie, we were talking this morning also about the idea of how the adult perceives the world of play and versus how the child perceives the world of play. And maybe this is a good time for you to talk about that.
I was thinking these days that for an adult, playing it's a time out of work, so it's not life, and for a child, it's his life. For an adult, it's recreative, and it's not creative. So that's the difference that should be. That should disappear, I think, because when you are a parent, you start again to go around the floor and to play, and that's important, and that's why for me it's important to say that that this term was opened me, because I start to reflect about all those things.
Yeah, I mean, when I write, I don't have a target audience in mind. When I'm thinking of marketing and other things, of course, when I'm thinking from a business head point of view, then I'm thinking in a different way. But I think writers, as Asha said, have to do this, especially in this day and age. I think we have to play two very distinct roles. First is the act of creation, in which I actually do not think of an ideal reader or who I'm writing for. The only difference is when I'm writing for a particular age group, my go-to criteria is, at that age would I have liked it. Of course, the first criteria is, as a writer, am I enjoying what I'm writing? If I'm not interested in what I'm writing, I'll most likely not work on it. That's criteria number one. But criteria number two usually is, when I'm writing for children, is at that age, if I had discovered this book or this story or this film, would I have enjoyed it? What I do after that is I do show it to a couple of children. I've had some wonderful, I remember once one of my favorite editors responded to a short story I'd written saying, I don't think kids are going to get this. It's too complicated, it has too many different arcs. I don't think a 10-year-old would get this. So I sent it to a friend's daughter who was 10 at that point. She read the story, and on the phone I told her that my editor doesn't think 10-year-olds will get it. She wrote a fairly nasty email back to me saying, you should tell your editor she does not understand 10-year-olds. And that's the thing. I think it's very difficult to guess what a kid is going to like or dislike, because there is no one kid, right? And it's the same thing for grown-ups. We never sit and figure out, will all grown-ups like this? I think we usually write for, some people, I know some writers write for an ideal reader in their mind, which is, I have a friend who only writes for her father. She's like, if my father will enjoy this, then everyone will enjoy this, right? That's a great way of looking at it. But I don't write for an ideal reader. I mostly write for myself at that age. So that's one angle of it. I think with the other thing that Asha mentioned, writers have to do a lot more now and be very, very actively involved with what happens after the book, after they have submitted a book or a story to the publisher. Yes, the book is printed, published, but I think we have to get very deeply involved with how we want the book to be marketed. How do we want to, especially for children? I think writers have to put in a lot more effort going to schools, talking to teachers, talking to parents, most importantly, talking to children. I think the one big thing that most children read stories and novels subscribed in schools are written by writers who have long been dead. The most young children do not realize that writers are also alive, that there are writers out there who are alive and kicking and still writing. They think writing was what was done 2 centuries ago, right? Because those are the people that they're reading. The moment they put a face to a story, a face to a book, it's a world-changing experience for them because their entire perspective on it changes. From a creativity point of view, every time you are able to show somebody the act of creating something or actually interact with them on that piece of work, could be a painting, could be a story, it actually tells them that, hey, people do this for a living. There are people out there who just sit and, let their imagination run wild and create things. So that, I think that has a huge positive effect. From a business standpoint, that's great because that actually leads to book sales. I think doing book tours and it kind of creates a word of mouth. A lot of international successes have happened because the writers engage directly with their readers. It's happening a lot now on the digital sphere also, where even self-published works, because the writers have been reaching out to their readers through blogs and actually interacting with the community that they are creating. People are running Kickstarter projects, so you're a successful writer and you are telling your audience that, hey, to survive this year, I just need $50,000, right? I mean, that's the kind of money I would make if my book sells for 3 years. $50,000 is all I need. I will write for you. So you're essentially directly dealing with your readers and saying, okay, fund my act of creation and have my books for free. And I think that's a perfect give and take, right? I think and of course it's a restricted model. Indiegogo, Kickstarter have had a few successful projects, but for every successful project there are hundreds which don't get funded. But the point is this is actually on the rise, which is you directly creating an audience for your work and directly interacting with them and actually increasing the growth, the actual value of your work in terms of disseminating it to people.
So, but that's also an interesting point that you just brought up, which is which also Asha talked about, which is going to schools and interacting with parents and educating parents and teachers and librarians and engaging with them in so many ways and letting children know that authors can be alive and they're not necessarily dead. These are all very important things, but it is, I think, for me, because I'm a little old school. I don't think it is always fair to expect an author to have to market their own books. But I do know that in this day and age, that is the most important thing. I know some international publishing houses which put it into their contract and say, amongst the responsibilities of the authors is to spend X number of hours on Twitter per year and to put out X number of blog posts and to gain this many followers by the end of the year and that sort of thing. And I can see that there are very tangible results in that. So I can see the reasoning behind that. But at the same time, there's a part of me that just protests and thinks, but these are writers. This is not what they're supposed to be doing. I mean, there are social media gurus out there who can do this much better and marketing people out there who can do this so much better. And it's almost as though the author now has to play this split personality kind of role where they will write the book and then they will just dissociate from themselves from the writer and face up to this big bad world of social media and go to schools and engage with children. And that's obviously very meaningful in so many ways. And I know authors who say that they've learned a lot by reading to children or working with children or reading to adults even for that matter. But on the other hand, it's like this slightly strange monster that it can completely take over all the creative faculties of a person. And I'm not sure. I'm actually a bit on the wall on this. As a publisher, I can see all the good sense in it, but at the same time, there is something about this that bothers me. So, what do you think, Sophie?
I think that the publisher, it's very important. Like my publisher, Gita Wolf of Tara Books, makes a wonderful work And I think that I will never do that work that she's doing at the beginning of the process and at the end of the process. I will never be like her and have the chance to be with her, because it depends on your personality. I'm the one who wants to go to the school and to talk and to the museums, and I love to be in contact with children, but all the marketing aspect, or to be, I don't have a website and all it's not me, so somebody can do it, and that's it. I appreciate if somebody is doing it a lot, but it depends on how you are, and I'm not stressed if I don't do it, because I think even a website, I made website for other people, but for me, I look at it and the day after I think it's old, so it's frustrating for me. So I want to be like that. But I'm very happy if someone is doing like the wonderful work that Gita made for me. That's it.
Yeah, so I'm exactly like Sophie, I think, on this. I love going to schools. I love interacting with children. I like working with them. I mean, it's also a generational thing because, my children have grown up a long time ago. So it's very important for me to get to know what children today are talking about, so that my work is still meaningful to them. And I just do wish that sometimes the publisher would just push my book, because it's kind of difficult for me to do it when I go on a school visit. But if that end could be tied up, it would be ideal. And I think, we don't really have much of a choice in what the publisher does. But when a publisher, like one of my publishers, really is active on Facebook on my account, on my behalf, and she's kind of tags me so that my Facebook following. So I'm so grateful. I'm really grateful for that. And but I do see that there is a need maybe to market my books in a little more proactive way. So I'm considering it. But the school visits, I totally enjoy. The other bit of it, like a website and all, it does take away from creative time. So, yeah.
And you're a publisher. I think this is totally on you. This is completely on you. And I agree. All those things are actually in the bigger scheme of things, they're not a waste of time, but they actually do keep you away from the actual act of creation, which is problematic. And this is where I think, publishers traditionally were tastemakers. You guys were the curators of phenomenal work. I think there's also a lot more pressure on publishers now. Almost every big publishing house has a social media team. Right? Even, that the traditional way of a book will be launched, there'll be a big party thrown at a 5-star hotel. A bunch of celebrities will come here. Somebody will actually cut a ribbon and inaugurate the book. Those things don't work. That'll lead to if there are 100 people in the audience, about 20 will buy, because those 20 know the author and they know that the author expects them to buy the book. But selling 20 books is not the target, right? So I think, and that's a waste of money. To be truly honest, every time a publisher tells me that instead of doing a book launch at a bookshop where a lot of walk-ins can happen and it actually creates a buzz, they say let's do a slightly more sophisticated event. I'm usually against it. Right? I'd also like to drink the free booze and have the good food. I think it's a real big waste. I'd much rather that we did 5 events in bookshops with the same amount of money. And I think that kind of puts a lot of onus on publishing houses also. It also means that there's a lot of new opportunities out there for individuals who are actually good at this stuff, for sales, marketing people, for social media people. This is and it's actually growing. You can see individuals who consult people on things like that. Just like we had freelance editors back in the day, now you have freelance social media experts. You have people who help you kind of either make your website and actually update your website regularly. make sure that you have a Twitter following, make sure that you are able to engage with your audience. So I think all those things are they are important. We live in that world. We cannot say that, while we can choose not to engage with them, engaging in them does make a difference.
I forgot to mention that in Bangalore, actually, there are a whole bunch of children's authors and illustrators who felt this need, and we started this forum called Bookalaw to do exactly this. It's a whole lot of us who do it, and we've received a lot of support from authors just doing events for us free, putting their own money to prepare the material. So that's happened. We've received a lot of support from parents who've come forward to say, okay, use my space free. So we are trying to do it collectively, which I think is also a good way to go about it in cities. Yeah.
And that's actually the truly wonderful thing about the world of children's publishing. Samina and I were talking about it just a few days ago, where we've worked with writers and publishers for children, and we've also worked with writers and publishers for adults. And there is this extraordinary difference between them in that I know children's book authors will go out of the way to help each other. One author will help organize a launch for another author. One author will tell a story that another has written. And I remember a few years ago when I was with a children's publishing house in Chennai, we helped organize sort of put together a book launch for a Delhi-based publisher who was coming down to Chennai. And somebody said, but aren't they your rivals? Why are you doing this? And I thought, my God, if we don't help each other out, who's going to help us? And this is something it's something that I've never seen in any other world in publishing other than the children's book world. We will all go out of our way to help each other. We will come and sit together at these forums and have these wonderful, engaging conversations. We will disagree with each other, but also do it in this hearty, very kind manner. And it's something that does not exist in so many other parts of the creative world. And it's really something that I think we should all pat ourselves on the back for, because it's really wonderful. And Bookalaw, for example, I know that there are so many authors who work for so many different publishers who come together to create this forum. And there is no competition or resentment or any such thing there. And these are some of the things that I think is very wonderful about the world of children's content. And these are the reasons, obviously, that Jumpstart is celebrating this world. So I think that that's something very extraordinary about the children's publishing process. So I think now might be a good time to throw this open to all of you to ask any questions. You can feel free to direct the questions at one of the particular panelists, or if it's a general thing, just ask away and we'll try to answer. If you have a question, you can just raise your hand and the mic will come.
Practically even a dinosaur, because I haven't seen any of these games that you're talking about. But I think a book does something that no app ever can. There's something about EQ and there's something about life skills that teaches a kid, which parents sadly seem to have forgotten. We say that boys don't speak, they don't communicate, we don't understand each other, we don't understand relationships. I think all of this gets addressed when there are kids who've been reading and who grow into adults who read. I also agree with what all of you said, that we're all cooperative, we help each other. And I agree with what Anjali said about the numbers and the statistics. So why not help each other out and help promote books by creating apps around Indian children's books? Is that something we could consider, or is that something that's already being done?
It's already happening. Sadly it's not happening in conjunction with traditional publishing, but there are a lot of businesses around. So just to give you an example, I'll not say books, because turning books into apps necessarily is not the solution, because then it doesn't work as a book and it doesn't work as an app. It's a different medium. You have to specifically write for that medium. It's not about turning a book into an ebook, which is a straightforward process, which is being done. Publishing now makes a lot of money off ebooks. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about specifically writing for that medium. Having said that, just to give you an example, across the globe on both Google Play and the App Store, which is iOS, children's publishers there are at least 2 children's publishers in the top 10 of all publishers in terms of total revenue made. These are not conventional publishers. These are people who are making apps for children specifically, right? Most of these are paid apps, so the parent purchases the app, right? And then the kid plays with the app, and there's a certain amount of time or certain amount of content that's already in it, right? There are no ads shown in this. This is all very, very clean content. So it's already happening. As far as India is concerned, it's just a matter of time. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And it will happen. I'm very sure there are a lot of people out there who are genuinely interested in making content for children, who are technically adapt at these mediums, right? So the idea is for the right kind of creators to get associated with the right kind of business people, the right kind of creators on those mediums as well. It's not. It's not. I mean, there are, even for absolute novices, you might not have any coding experience. There are plenty of websites and apps out there which help you in creating apps, right? It's all. I mean, let's look at it this way, right? Writing is not easy. We put in a lot of hard work to become writers. It takes a lot of effort to become good at anything. So why not put in a little bit of effort also to figure out how to create something on a different medium? It's the same thing. There is a learning curve to it. It's not going to be easy, but it's not rocket science.
How would you both feel about that? The idea of somebody picking up something that you created and converting it into an app? Would that be like good myself?
I'd be open to it as well, because I think we saw at the Delhi conference, there was an example, I forget who showed us, like Eric Carle books and Dr. Seuss books. They're like an extension of the book. So you read the book and you do different things. So I'd be open to that, yeah.
Okay. Apart from the irony that we are talking of play and you're sitting very calmly, I want to ask you, this idea that I want to tell a story through some media, and I want the child to play with the story. So in a strange way, I am playing with the child through a story. That requires a two-way thing, right? That requires sort of a interactivity. And that sort of gets lost in a print media because you don't get feedback back. And I know that Anshu's book, the game book, has some sort of a play in the print media form. But how do you work with that? Because you're talking about play, I want to tell a story, I want to play with the kid, but there is no feedback. So it's like broadcast. So a book is like broadcast. How is it playful at all?
So I'm quickly going to weigh in on this before passing the mic along. I remember reading somewhere, I think it's a famous quote, that when it comes to something like a picture book, every time you read it or every time you go through it with a child, it's like a different story comes out at you. So if you read a picture book 10 times, it's almost like reading 10 different stories. And that's something that is, I think, a sort of the kind of interaction that you were talking about. And I have seen this occur across levels. And I've now I've been working on several middle grade and young adult novels as well. And I'm seeing how children are reacting to them. And they're reacting to the book in a certain way, in a way that's not necessarily going to the author directly, but they are reacting with the book itself. And that's in some level, I think that's kind of the interaction that you're talking about. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, you've said it really perfectly, Mansi. So I think the validation that the author looks for, you can only get it when you actually reach out and interact with children. But you know that they're doing it in the privacy of their homes, because you've seen it happen with your own children, that they just play or enact things, they become characters. So yeah, I think
It's not a two-way street. You're right. It's like broadcasting in that sense, because obviously there's no feedback directly coming to the author, right? The idea is to induce play, right? So from that, it is unidirectional in a lot of sense. You want parents and children to be able to play with the book. Sadly, you won't get to experience it unless they write back to you or you are present. So it is unidirectional. But the idea is not the idea is to induce it and not necessarily get a feedback on it. Of course, the best way of doing it is that you also directly interact with children so that at least you know whether it works or not. Having said that though, the classical approach of like a writer writes a book, it gets printed, it gets published, a bunch of people read it, they send him feedback on it eventually, and this whole process takes like years later, somebody will write you a letter about, hey, I really liked your book. That thing has been, that time difference has been cut short. Most people now can consume things and immediately write some feedback on Amazon or Flipkart or directly write to the author. Authors do directly engage with their readers a lot. You also have to create secondary ways of interacting with people. So for example, 39 Clues, this very, very famous series of books for children. So you read the book. Within the book, there is a treasure hunt. For the treasure hunt, you have to go online. You have to interact with the author's website. You have to find clues and work with other readers of the books and then kind of get back. So the loop is completed. So there are subsidiary ways. I mean, there are other ways of kind of completing that loop. But yeah, directly, not so much. That I agree with.
And thank you all for organizing it. And I'm somebody, I love children. I love colors and I love artwork. So I just started to play around and did illustrations. As soon as I did that, just for myself. As soon as I did that, also ideas came for stories to me. So I donated like 4,000 copies already to an ashram, and they sold very fast. Then friends of mine said, when you just have your book sitting on your shelf, and they all had sold out, why don't you self-publish it? So I self-published it with Partridge because Penguin Random House is a good name. And I'm not a multimedia person. I'm not a marketing person. I created, with the help of friends, a page on Facebook. I went on LinkedIn. I have no idea what to do with it. But since 4 months, I'm working on this. And I could have written another book. So what you said, that marketing is a different story. That was really heartwarming for me. Thank you, because I struggled.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah, hi. I would like to bring in, as educator, the child development perspective into this. Even as a parent also, I feel like the first 12 years of a child, I am very nervous about introducing technology into the child's life. And there are a few things about making books available using technology and creating games on using technology that I would like to just point out. One is like just the act of reading a regular physical book to a child. Actually, first of all, it engages the child through all the 5 senses. Smell, touch, and even adult reading to a child, whereas using technology, the technology can start reading to the child. Parents can start depending on that rather than they themselves reading out. Plus, I think research is coming out with the evidence that a child learning to read engages the brain in so many different ways. The brain has to work really hard to actually learn how to read. And that, I think, children are missing out by getting introduced to technology too early. And the third point I would like to point out is like most of the games and the apps that are coming out, the reason children get addicted to it is because it provides regular feedback to the child on how he or she is doing, and that and whether they are scoring more points or not. And based on that, children start to want more and more out of the game, and they start to get addicted for it. But then that makes them dependent on instant gratification, whereas the world doesn't really work that way. Whereas books, getting them introduced to regular physical books actually makes them really work hard. And I think first 12 years until the brain matures, this is extremely important. And it always makes me nervous that many publishers and many toy companies are moving towards electronic media even for very, very young children. So what do you say about this, like doing the right thing for the child? I mean, whatever I'm saying is not just as an educator and a parent, but this is based on the research that is coming out on how the brain develops. So what do you say about doing the right thing for the child? I mean, rather than depending on what makes most business sense, doing the right thing for the child, isn't that what we should be focusing on?
I went into a debate about old school versus new school, which was not necessarily the intention, but would you like to respond?
I'm probably the most old school person also. I mean, believe me, if you walk into my house, you will see thousands of books. I read a book on my Kindle, and if I like it, I also order a physical copy of it because I would still like to own a physical copy of it. So, talking of children, see, so there are two aspects of it. From early childhood education perspective, from a pedagogy perspective, I think a different take has to be taken on it because that's a take that educators and parents have to take together. I won't get into that. I think I would get into it from a individual's perspective, right? I think it's completely the parents' responsibility and their prerogative to figure out how they want their kid growing up. One could also argue that if till a certain age you restrict access to electronic devices, it's actually going to hamper your child's progress in future because he's going to be competing in a world which is incredibly tech savvy, right? All of us in this audience know a time before email. We know a time when there was only one website, Yahoo. Or we also know a time when we had those 56 kbps modems which used to make sounds when we used to get connected. Our kids are not going to grow up in that world. Our kids will know gigabits per second networks. Our kids will have 8 or 10 devices at home. So saying that if you keep a child away from that, it's going to help in the child's development. We don't know what the world is going to be. 600 years back, by the way, there were no books, right? Printed books have only existed for 600 years. Ralph will point this out. Books are also a form of technology, by the way. It's a printed material. It is technology. When books came out, people said it's heresy to print the word of the Lord. Books were burnt as a result of that. So this is a continuous thing. People back in the day also were saying, man, kids who are reading books, I don't know what's going to happen to them. Right? So this is going to be an ongoing debate, and it's a worthwhile debate, right? But at the end of it, it is you as an individual who has to take a call about the level up to which you want your kids interacting with media. By the way, most modern schools are moving towards a medium in which where technology is going to be a very integral part of the classroom. Now that's a pedagogical discussion. That's a school deciding that yes, we want iPads in our classroom, or we want our teachers to interact with them. We want them to video conference with educators around the country or around the world, right? Technology also breaks a lot of barriers, right? So it goes both ways. Everything has to be done in moderation. As I said earlier, if a kid is reading for 20 hours a day, there is no way that is good for him, right? You also want your kid to go out and play, right? Imagination is triggered in a lot of ways, not just by a book. It is triggered by paintings. It is triggered by actually communicating with people. It is also triggered by playing games, by playing actual physical sports, by playing games of different kinds, because growth happens across multiple mediums, right? So everything has to be done in moderation, and it's a parent, you have to decide it. I don't think other people can decide this for you.
Actually, I disagree that it's only the parents act in a moderate way in a child's world today. That's the reality. So that's why I'm asking this question. Isn't it something that the publishers or the people creating these gamings, they also have a responsibility to do the right thing for the child? That's the question I'm asking.
can I say something? I think that a child has to be part of his contemporary world. So I think that in this case too, we have to learn with them how to face it. And so I think that parents and the other people who cares has to be to see the balance in it's what he said. But it's very important for me that the kid is in his contemporary world. So that's why we have to. When I see my kids playing a lot, I want to know how is the play. I want to know more about it, to make him, to show him what is the balance. You know, I think that we are afraid because we don't know how it works, and we don't know, and we don't know what it brings. But if we go there with them and try to learn the play or how it works, and then bring them to our world, our way of thinking, so they can see our world and their world. But you cannot eliminate. They have to be in the world, I think.
So I think we have time for one more question.
All right. Hi. I'm gonna. Oh, sorry. I'm daring to quickly weigh in on the debate of old school and new school with a quick comment, and then I'll ask my question. Yesterday, a couple of days ago, I thought I'd buy a Kindle. So realized I need access to more books, and it was a rather disappointing discovery in a way, because you live or you grow up with the romantic notion of the tactile, the organic feel and touch and sensation of reading a physical book, but then on the other hand, the act of writing, where emotions are explored and talked about and characters are developed, still exist in the format of the Kindle. And so I figured, well, the times they are changing, and maybe change with them or continue. But anyway, moving on to my question, it's about language. What language you adopt while writing for children? It's something I'm struggling with, because on the one hand you have, you think, well, Sophie said she remembers all her thoughts when she was 5. I don't even remember my thoughts from 2 days ago. And when I was a kid, I'd like to relive that, and sometimes I relive it with children and try to see what they're thinking at a certain age. But that is there a formula for language for certain ages? Like if you're writing for a 12-year-old, you're struggling with the idea that this is what they like, or this is what I felt, or these were my concerns and my interests when I was 12. But also the beauty of language and the richness of speaking and using language and using words. How do you gauge what level works? Is there a formula, or is there something that could guide you with storytelling for different ages?
There's no formula, and in fact there are a lot of publishers who just shy away from putting an age on the book. Now I personally, because I've been at events where books are sold, I know that that's the first thing the parent asks for. They say, what age group? And then you have to tell them that, like, open the book, read a few pages and see if your child would like it. And children have such varying reading abilities that it's really difficult to say that this book is going to work for this age group, because you have some very confident readers who are reading, Harry Potter at the age of 6 or 7. So I think writers for children, one thing that they do have is like some instinctive feel. I don't know how it happens. There's no formula. Though I think Nouri is going to address later in his class, if you are, there are some tools with which you can check readability levels. But I think it's largely instinctive, and there's no one formula which works, that this sort of vocabulary and language. But I would say that give children all the richness of language and expression and description in a book, because that's about one of the places you can really do it well.
My observation is connected to the debate about new media and designing for mobiles versus books. And the one thing that I feel that we tend to sort of skip over is I'm a gamer as well, and I read a lot and I love illustration. So it's just an observation that books tend to be a sort of a self-contained unit with controls written. What I find when I read on my iPad is my attention gets fragmented tremendously. So I read a little bit of a book and then I go back to bed and then I see all these covers and then I click on something else. But with books, those controls are written, and there are so many other factors. It's not backlit. There's ambient light. You can sort of reflect, turn a page, and then you can sort of drift off. It doesn't call you. It doesn't beep. It doesn't that sort of a thing. So I think that we are missing that. And if we can, designers of games or apps, have you ever played Myst from the 90s? And compare that to modern games, and you will see that Myst is like a book. It's very self-contained. It's got controls built in, and you can play it over a year and take your time, just like a book. And but modern games are not like that. And you're right. I mean, if you go to Gutenberg and see Gutenberg.org and see the old books, and you see how publishing has sort of evolved, and you see books today, you can see that same sort of disconnect. Books have evolved. So I know we are at a turning point, but what the lady was saying, and I think we do have a responsibility when we are designing apps and games to sort of build in controls for reflection and build in controls for children to sort of take their time off, not fragment their attention so much.
I'll just come in, very valid point. A page is not a screen. I think that is the fundamental difference here. Books have cracked being a book. Books are very good at being books. E-books are not very good at being books. But that doesn't mean that the medium of a screen is bad. Let's not correlate the two things. There are better ways of reading on devices, and you'll see that change. For example, in a book, we read from left to right? Our eyes actually scan the page. That's a very inefficient way of reading. It works in a book format. It does not work on a screen. So there's a lot of new technology where the words actually scroll past. You keep your eye on one spot on the screen. Your cognition ability increases tremendously. It's a very efficient way. Your speed will be much faster. You will actually recollect a lot of what you have read, right? So this is specific to that medium, right? And that's why I'm saying when a page gets translated to the screen, it's just a bad use of the screen. A screen is meant for a lot more, and those things are still being explored. Let's give it some time. It's a new medium. This is new technology. A lot of new things have to be discovered. Books will be a lot more legible and enjoyable on that medium once we have cracked what a story can be on that medium. We don't have all the answers, and that is why what you said even about games. That's a different discussion. We won't get into that. But yeah, I agree with you. But that's because of this huge gap between a page and a screen.
Okay. Yeah, just a few quick observations as someone who observes the publishing industry in India. The thing about, and this has actually unfortunately nothing to do with the topic of storytelling, so I'm sticking to what has been discussed about statistics here. Statistically, we are a growing country, so the figures for mobile phones and smartphone adoption and content through these would look very good for us because we have a population to support that. But on the other hand, reading is also improving, so the number of printed books are increasing, and any publisher will tell you, especially in the children's book segment, they are growing hugely around the world, not just in India. So I think what happens in defense of, and I love technology of every kind, even from human communication. There are many storytellers here in our group today, and there are people who are bringing back traditional games back into currency and helping children get introduced to them. So I think all of these will coexist, and we should really look at a hybrid kind of a system without having to justify one technology over the other, because they all support each other. And the wonderful thing for our children today is that they can have it all, which we didn't. So it's an exciting time to be creators, and it would help for many creators to understand how technology works, because it offers potential of a very different kind. And children will also read, they will also play games, they will do many, many things. And I think it's good to be on, across the spectrum on this. So that's all I'd like to add to this.
Thank you, Vinita. I think that I feel today are living in a very fortunate time where they can have it all. And now that I think about it, in this city which so marries the old and the new, the traditional with the edgy and the modern, software with old fashioned, I'm not surprised that this is the turn that this discussion today took. I'm so glad we came to Bangalore and had this wonderful conversation. We've all of us I know have had many things to think about thanks to all these insightful questions that you asked. I hope you enjoyed the panel. A big round of applause for our wonderful panelists.